Yes, welcome. It's great to have you all here. With our on-snow programs under a bit of threat this year, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to move the education side of things online. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about the athlete pathway in a broad sense across all disciplines. And I'll start by talking a little bit about what Futures is, about what programs are out there and how it can help you. And then I'll hand off to Rebecca Clark, who'll be talking a little bit about the athlete pathway and introducing you to the FTEM framework. And then finally, we are very lucky to have our esteemed Alpine director, Sean Fleming, in the house. Sean will be joined by some of the other coaches from other disciplines that are staying with him at Sport and Rec in Jindabyne, and they will be discussing how their disciplines are coping with the current environment, and specifically what sort of skill development you guys can be doing if you don't have access to any on-snow programs at the moment. So really important discussions, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about that a little bit later on. So let's get into it. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Johnny. I'm the Sports Development Officer at Snow Australia. One of my key roles is the management of futures programs. It's something that I personally really enjoy. But before I dive into all things futures, I thought I'd share with you guys my own pathway through snow sports. My hope is that, it resonates with you in some way, or you get something out of it. But if not, I figured at least you'll get to know me a little bit better and understand where I've come from, and that I was once like many of you, I'd like to believe. So from the photos here, you can probably see I used to dabble in the dark arts of slopestyle skiing, but that's not where my pathway actually started. I started out at the Falls Creek Race Club as a young buck. I was just 8 years old, and I absolutely loved it. I was a little frother, and I had a little bit of success at a young age. I won the junior national champs in slalom and GS. But I also had another passion on the side, and that was trampolining. And I'd had a little bit of success in that as well. I'd podiumed at a national champs, and I'd entered my first junior world champs at the age of 12. So already at the base of my pyramid here on the second tier, I was starting to be pulled in different directions, because as I got more serious with each sport, they obviously started demanding more and more of my time. And for most of you all, a time will come when your pathway in skiing or snowboarding starts to become challenged by other commitments in your life. And, this can be a very difficult thing, because it's really hard to know what the right answer is, especially when you're quite young. And no one can really tell you that answer. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself. And, let's be real, snow sports, it can be a really challenging pathway. It can demand a lot of your time and a lot of your resources, but at the same time, it can be incredibly rewarding if that's what you really love to do. Anyway, back to my pyramid here. So anyway, I'm 13 years old, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break from competitive snow sports. I'm going to sort of take a year to just have fun and free ski. And sorry, I don't know what's happening here. And and whatever calls to me more after that year, whether that's trampolining or alpine, that's what I'm going to sort of dedicate the rest of my life to. So I joined the Erin Style Freestyle program at Falls Creek. At the time, this was heavily a mogul program. It had a little bit of all mountain and a little bit of terrain park. And, once I got my first pair of twin tips, that was it for me. That's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I never went back to alpine or to trampolining, and I never regretted it. And having said that, both of those things at the base of my pyramid here, they're essential ingredients to my pathway in park and pipe. Alpine gave me really good fundamental skiing skills on snow, and trampolining obviously gave me a little bit of aerial awareness that helped me sort of accelerate my learning curve in the terrain park. So the next phase of my pathway, sort of in the middle of my pyramid here, I'll call my athlete development phase. This was a really interesting time. You know, there were no national championships for any of my events in Park and Pipe, and there were no certified coaches. There were no real pathway programs in place, and there were certainly no national teams. So training would really just consist of going and riding in the terrain park with your friends and pushing each other to learn new tricks. And this is a really important part of skill development that I wanted to get across to you guys is, you know, riding with your friends, whether you're alpine, snowboard, freestyle or Park and Pipe. That element of free riding or free play is really important, not just to prevent burnout, but to help you guys become really complete and developed riders in whatever discipline you're in. So in summary, my time as a developing athlete, it was a lot of fun, but there was no real direction or pathway in place. And looking back on it, I lacked a sense of focus. Like I had all of these dreams and goals and a little bit of talent, but I had no way to really harness it. And my goals were vague. Like, for example, all I wanted to do was to get invited to the US X Games, but I had no real plan to get there. I thought that if I just became an elite rider and learnt all the latest double corks and could put together a good slopestyle run, the rest would take care of itself. But, you know, it never really did for me. And then when I was 21 years old, I ended up having a horrible accident and I broke my leg pretty badly. And at the time I didn't know it, but it was a career-ending injury. And, you know, I was devastated because my whole life was tied up in skiing. But what it did do is it opened up new opportunities to me. You know, I started coaching for Team Buller throughout my rehab, and I continued coaching with them for several years after. I started working and managing on overseas training camps in the US and in Europe. And then, you know, the pinnacle of my coaching career, I got to coach Park and Pipe at the Youth Olympic Games in Lillehammer, which is an absolutely unbelievable experience. And then eventually, I realized, you know, it was time for me to transition into something else. So I reached out to my contacts at Snow Australia and asked if I could start as an intern there. A year later, I was offered a full-time contract. And now, you know, I'm in a position where I can still be involved in skiing and pursue a career. And, you know, that's why I've adorned my pyramid here with a bit of a smiley face, because, you know, it really did have a happy ending for me after all, even though it took me quite a while to get there and it was perhaps an unconventional method. And, you know, the reason I wanted to start off this webinar series with telling you a little bit about my journey is to promote the message that everyone has a unique pathway in snow sports. You know, where you start out isn't necessarily where you're going to finish. And, you know, in fact, it's very rare that that's the case. But if there's one thing I could change, it'd be to really focus and to work a little bit harder on a set of goals once I'd made that decision to become elite. And if you truly want to be elite, you know, your goals both on and off snow should reflect that. And that's what Futures does, or one of the things it does is it tries to provide you guys with some of the resources so you can start setting goals and learning about the extra things you can be doing both on and off snow. And the reason for this is so that, you know, if you do make it into an institute program one day or a national team, you're ready to go. Like you can be plugged straight into the system. And if you're young, you know, if you're 10, 11, 12, 13, it doesn't have to start with anything too serious, guys. Like you just start by doing a bit of goal setting and getting into a routine with that. You know, learn a little bit about nutrition, about strength and conditioning, about mind-body connection, start an acrobatic training program if you have access to it. And if through all of this you find out, you know what, I don't really want to be an elite athlete, then that's fine as well. Maybe you just want to be the best rider you can be. Maybe you just want to have fun. Maybe you want to get into filming or instructing or coaching or officiating or anything that's going to keep you involved with the sport. And, you know, there are pathways being developed for all of these things. And finally, the main point, you know, I want to get across is that there are pathways now in place that were never really available to my generation. And, you know, at 13 years old, I think a Park and Pipe Futures would have really helped me. And then again at 16, when I was preparing to finish school, access to institute programs or a national team would have really helped me to focus on my goals and harness what potential I did have. And this athlete pathway is something that we at Snow Australia are constantly striving to improve. And I would just implore you all to keep an open mind and to take advantage of any resources that are open to you along the way. Okay, so, excuse me. Well, hopefully you're not asleep after that. I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about what Futures programs are and how they can help you. So in a nutshell, Futures programs are developed by Snow Australia for the next generation of snow sport athletes. That's you guys. They're an important stepping stone in the athlete pathway, and they help us to identify talent as it moves through the pathway, but they'll also help you guys to improve your skills and to try and prepare you for high performance sport if you do want to make that transition. And you might be asking yourself, you know, I might not have quite sold you yet. You might be asking, well, Johnny, you know, why should I really do a Futures program? What's in it for me? And to answer that, I'd say, number one, get yourself on our radar. You know, there'll be national team coaches and Snow Australia staff at all of our on-snow programs. We're always looking for new talent and keeping an eye on developing talent. We certainly have other talent ID processes in place, and Beck may talk a little bit about that later, but Futures is a huge one, guys, in terms of talent ID. Develop your skills. So learn from the elite athletes and coaches in our sport. At the beginning of every on-snow program, I implore all the participants to really be a sponge and just to soak up all that information from the elite athletes and coaches. See where you stack up nationally compared to other kids your age outside of competition, because as we know, competition isn't everything, guys, especially at the developmental level. You know, you might come away from a Futures camp and have a better understanding of what skills you need to work on to get to that next level. Educate yourself. So, you know, you can find out what resources are available to you. This information will usually be part of Futures programs. Prepare yourself for high performance sport, as I've touched on earlier. And finally, guys, you know, have fun and build your network. While snow sports are certainly an individual sport in many aspects, especially when you're competing, they're also very much a team sport if you think about the way that you learn and the way that you train. And it's a unique sport in the fact that it's social and it's a lifestyle sport, really. So Futures, you know, they encourage you to meet new people, to make relationships with athletes and coaches and Snow Australia staff, and just to test yourself and get out there and have fun, guys. That's what it's all about, really. Okay, so here are some of the Futures programs that we offer. We have our pre-season camps in the Melbourne school holidays. We also have one at the AIS in Canberra. These are a lot of fun and they'll help you prepare for the upcoming season. We have an ongoing acrobatics program in Melbourne and Sydney throughout the school term. We'll have Anthony Curry in from East Gymnastics as part of webinar 3 to present. So make sure you guys are all tuning in for that. Snowboardcross Futures at Mount Hotham, I had an absolute blast at this one last year. We had record numbers and amazing weather. All participants got to ride with the national team for 2 days on course in the lead up to the events there. And that's just a really unique experience, and I'd encourage you all to get involved in that if you are snowball cross athletes. Ski cross, I keep saying this, but it's a lot of fun for me anyway. We have a sort of similar thing going where we had the national team there, and race clubs were able to rotate through the course to do a couple of hours of training before the National Children's Champs at Falls Creek. Park and Pipe Futures, this one's obviously very close to my heart. I've been involved as a coach on this Futures before my time at Snow Australia. It's a lot of fun. And I keep saying that, but it is. Para Snow Sports Futures. So this is run by Annie Geiger, who's our Para Snow Sports manager at Snow Australia. She'll be presenting next week to you guys a bit on goal setting. But she runs the Para Snow Sport Futures. It gives para athletes the opportunity, to develop their skills and learn a bit about classifications and what resources might be available to them, and some info around the athlete pathway. Finally, guys, we're really hoping to run a Moguls Futures this year, but that has temporarily been put on hold, which brings me to 2020 Futures, triple question mark. So unfortunately, due to the current environment, it's highly unlikely that we'll be able to deliver any on Snow Futures programs this year. What we will do is look to hold an online webinar for each discipline that will have content relevant to those disciplines, and you'll have some access to the national team to ask them some questions and hear about their stories. That series will be starting in August, and I'll have a little bit more info on that in the coming weeks. So finally, where you guys can find out some more info, I'll give a bit of a plug. So our main channel of communication is, for all things Futures, is through the website. We'll also send things out through the Snow Australia e-news on Fridays, and where relevant, I'll push out promo through sports clubs. But what I'd really recommend is, if you're interested, you just send me an email with your name and your Snow ID, and I'll sign you up to the Futures mailing list and keep you updated on all things Futures. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me, guys, if you do have any questions, either at the end of the webinar or in the coming weeks. My virtual door is always open during lockdown. And that's all from me for the moment. Thank you all for your time and your attention, and I wish you all the best with the upcoming season. I hope that some of you are able to get out there on snow and do a bit of training. For those of you in lockdown in Melbourne, like I am, stay strong. Things will get better, and I'm sure we'll all be together soon out there on the snow enjoying what we love to do. I'll now hand over to Rebecca Clark, who's going to go over a bit of the athlete pathway with you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Johnny.
Transition now. There we go.
There we go. Does it work? Okay. Oh, can you see that? So,
yes.
Okay? Yep. Wonderful. Thanks, Johnny. That was very insightful and inspiring. So it's great to hear that. And it's very reflective in about what I'm about to talk about too. So those that don't know me, my name is Rebecca Clark. I'm the National Alpine and Pathway Coordinator for Snow Australia. As part of my role, I work really closely with Ben Wordsworth, who is the Performance Pathway and Program Manager, as well as alongside our Alpine Director, Sean Fleming. And my biggest part of my role is really identifying and developing and delivering key pathway initiatives for all disciplines to support our sport, our clubs, and parents and athletes. I was really instrumental in putting together the athlete pathway, frameworks, and working with the key experts within each of the disciplines and outside of the sport to put together a framework that was really usable and workable across all other disciplines. Tonight, I'm just going to be overviewing and providing a bit of background about what is the FTEM framework, how it came about, how it was actually developed, and then going into some key points that will hopefully help all our athletes and parents to understand the different stages and how to use the information and the resource to progress through the athlete pathway. I'll also be touching on physical literacy and fundamental movement skills. This is a big part of our athlete pathway, and I'm very excited to have 4 of our head coaches and directors with us this evening, including Sean, who's our Alpine director, Jason Clausen, who's our N-Swiss snowboard coach, snowboard cross head coach, Leon Tarbottom, who's our N-Swiss Park and Pipe coach, as well as David Parr, who is the Park program coordinator, as well as a coach. So let's get started. So for those that don't know, we actually look after in Snow Australia 13 disciplines and 8 pathways. Prior to FTEM and bringing this into the organisation, the current framework we were using wasn't really progressive or didn't really allow us to sort of identify those gaps and opportunities and provide measure things for our community to develop. The FTEM framework, which stands for Foundation, Talent, Elite and Mastery, was actually introduced through the 2017 Alpine National Review with Mick Branch, the former director, Alpine director, as well as Sean Fleming. And they worked together they reviewed and worked together in the community and then took what they believed were, I guess, gaps and opportunities and went to the AIS, where they met with the AIS team and they introduced this framework to us. They brought it back into Snow Australia and we adopted it as a whole of sport approach. The main reason why we chose this framework is that it was evidence-based. It was based off a large survey out to elite athletes and talking about their journeys. And it advocates best practice approach to athlete development. It's also not age prescriptive or restrictive, so it's not based on age. It's more based on where you would be sitting within the pathway and what you should be focusing on. The one thing I love about this pathway, it actually links participation and performance pathways together. Every single elite performance athlete has gone through a participation pathway, has been involved in participation sport. So it's a real great understanding on how you or being in that participation gives you the skills to actually move through into the performance pathway. How it was put together, as I mentioned before, I worked with key experts within the sport. So 4 of them we'll speak to at the end of this evening, and experts outside of the sport. And we looked at what the top line athlete actually looked like for their sport and used their athlete profile and their characteristics to understand how they progressed right from the very bottom through the pathway to the top. For those that don't know, we have recently finished all 8 of our pathways. It took about 2.5 years to go through all the different disciplines. They are available on the website. So if you jump on snow.org.au, click on the Pathways tab, Athlete Pathway, and scroll down, you'll see all the brochures for each of the discipline, which goes through everything that I'm kind of going over tonight. I strongly recommend that if you haven't already, definitely jump onto our website and download that brochure to look through. Okay, so the athlete's pathway, the stages within our pathway. So this document overviews each, or gives a snapshot of each of the pathway as you progressively move through it. To start down the bottom, as you can see, the green is really based around the foundation or the participation pathway. This has 3 stages within this pathway. And if you start at F1, moving through, F1's really about that first time experience on snow with family and friends, that snow play, and just building the love of the sport. F2 is when athletes move into structured lessons for the first time. So that could be private lessons, that could be group lessons with instructors. And they might start sort of thinking about interschools and moving into interschools. F3 is probably the largest, where 90% of our population, our community actually sits within this part of the pathway. A lot of people will remain in this section for a largest period of throughout their snow sports or skiing career. It really covers, what I love about this stage is that it covers everybody. So it's not subjective just to interschools, it's not subjected to club athletes. It actually looks at all athletes, including masters, uni athletes, and everyone that just loves skiing and being part of competitive snow sports. For a club athlete or someone that is sort of sitting at interschools and has had lessons and wonders what the next steps are, this is when they move into a club program. And in doing that, they actually start really refining skill development through that regular coaching, sampling and practice. They still do extensive free play, so they're still skiing a lot with their family and friends, and they're still doing a lot of activity off snow as well. For a program, which I just briefly touched on, this stage is generally doing a part-time or full-time club program, and that's where they need to be in order to start progressing into the performance pathway. Again, some event examples for this side of the pathway. I mentioned interschools. Interschools primarily sits within this stage of the pathway. Interschools doesn't progress into the performance pathway, but it's a wonderful event. I was involved in interschools for a long time, so it's a very huge event and something that's very close to my heart. So if you're not doing interschools, well, obviously not this year, but next year is something definitely to give it a go to see if you would be interested in competitive snow sports. It's also at this stage that we start recommending that athletes that are in clubs that look at doing other events or higher level events. So that could be a FIS event, that could be children's carnival with the Alpine, or a junior mogul series if you're a mogulist. So moving on from the green, which is the foundation, into the blue and the black section, which is the talent to elite. So this is really the performance pathway and describes each step. In terms of the T section, which stands for talent, it's about identifying a talent athlete, developing them, and then getting them ready for podium success. Elite is where they are currently out in the higher events like World Championships, for example, and they're podium ready, or they're starting to get podium wins. M1 is the mastery level. So within the world, there are not many athletes that sit within the mastery level. To be at that mastery level, you need to have multiple podium successes. And currently speaking, an athlete that comes to mind, which I'm sure is like in the middle of our screen that everyone loves and knows, is Scotty James. So he would be one of the few that would actually sit within that M1 stage. For this group, I thought it would be nice to just briefly touch on that T1 performance pathway where that potential is identified. This stage is very fluid. So sometimes from an F3, athletes will progress in this stage, and then they may not be ready to be in that stage and go back to F3 and then come back again. So it's a very fluid process. It's really about just identifying the potential that these athletes have for the performance pathway. To identify that, or that initial demonstration, and to identify that, Snow Australia looks at what we call either formal or informal processes. So our organisation works very closely with the club coaches. The coaches also work very, as Johnny mentioned about futures, they also work, they attend futures to have a look at who's out there and understand where they are sitting and what their skills are like. So, and then they look at them through two processes. So that's that formal process I mentioned as the first one. So that's about skills assessment. That's about turning up to clubs, having an attendance. It does actually still include competition results on some level. And then the other one is the informal. And this is a hard one for coaches to sometimes decipher and understand what this is, but it's about the coach's eye. Coaches work with a lot of different athletes. They recognize the potential in the way that the athlete's attitude is, how they turn up for training, if they're prepared, if they want to be there, how their mindset is for when they win or when they lose, when they're ready to turn up, and how dedicated they are to the sport. So that type of thing is really an informal process of identifying talent. At this stage, if athletes are T1, they should be in a full-time seasonal program. They also should be looking at those higher events that I spoke about in F3, like the FIS events, the ANCs. They should potentially be looking to move away from interschools, really just focusing on their training and making sure they make the most of their training environment. As a northern here, in the southern winter, we actually have a leg up on the northern winter because we have that extra training. Because as a performance athlete, your stage is actually during the northern winter. So it's a really good way of making sure you get that leg up on other northern athletes. And a lot of those come over to Australia and New Zealand to train as well. The next section I wanted to briefly go over was this content that's sitting behind each stage. So within the brochure, each stage has a breakdown of these nine categories. The first one is the participant or the athlete. So that really describes what the participant should be doing or the athlete is doing and helps identify that where you actually sit. The programs, competition and equipment focuses on where at that level, what program the athlete should be focusing on or should be involved in, what type of competitions you should be looking at, and of course the equipment. Equipment is so important. Having the right fit of equipment is vital to any development as an athlete. So if you're unsure, you should definitely speak to your club coaches to check your equipment and to see if there's anything that's going wrong with it. We also have a section about leadership and support. So it shows who leads this area of the pathway, who makes the decisions to try and develop the athletes as best as possible. And then there's that support mechanism, which is parents and can be coaches as well, instructors, that helps support your athlete to move through the pathway. Athlete preparation is really around the mindset and making sure that you're understanding what you should be doing at what stage. There's a lot of goal setting in this athlete preparation, a bit about resilience, self-regulation. So things like that actually help you progress as an athlete. And finally, there's the on-snow skill development and what you should be doing off-snow as well. And it sort of fine-tunes what those areas should be. It is different for every single discipline. So if you are in one or two or thinking of what you should do, make sure you sort of cross-compare the two discipline brochures. So to sort of sum up what I've been talking about, I thought it'd be easy to put together a bit of a overview of how you actually can move through the pathway. It's important that this is just a generalization, so you need to refer back to the athlete brochure for more information around that. So the first one if you're an F2, F3 athlete, from interschools or snow sports programs, you should actually move into club programs or futures. We get a lot of questions about what athletes should be doing or participants that want to progress should be doing. You should be in club programs. We work with as I mentioned, we work with the coaches there. We have an overview of where the athletes are and futures as well, having that exposure. From there, working with the club coaches, we look at selecting athletes to go into the emerging talent program. This isn't a program as such, but rather a resource that we use to support our athletes who are still in club programs. So they might get some extra educational support. They will generally, out of COVID year, we'll have 1 or 2 camps where they have people come in and do some strength and conditioning and some testing with them. To get into the emerging talent program, it is really best to understand to be in the club system, go to the futures, and we identify through what I spoke about before with those intangibles, those formal and informal. From ETP, athletes move through those that have been identified and verified as talent, generally move through into NSWIS or VIS programs. For alpine and cross country, we have the National Alpine Ski Team or the cross country national teams. They currently don't have programs as such, but athletes can get individual scholarships within those National Institute programs. From there, those that move through up into T4 into M1 get OWIA, which is the Olympic Institute of Australia. So they get invitation into this specific program. A lot of those athletes still also might be NSWIS athletes for those additional supports. Okay, so let's move on now and have a look at understanding fundamental movement skills and physical literacy. You might have noticed through the program, and even when Johnny was speaking about his experience, the idea of having good skill development was very vital in making sure you progress through to the performance pathway. Snow Australia has a huge focus at the moment on raising the physical capacity within the pathway, and we are looking at initiatives that will really focus on that physical literacy and those fundamental movement skills. Why is it so important to have really good fundamental movement skills? It's because it's the platform of success for long-term athlete development. It also helps maximize your talent potential and your ability to adapt and to become a great skier or snowboarder. It also helps minimize the risk of injury. So the more that you are prepared from the early onset, the more chance or less chance you'll have of injuring yourself. So what is physical literacy? Let's start here. So physical literacy is the development of the whole person. It's the individual's ability to understand and execute movement with confidence and competence. The physical literacy actually has 4 domains. Obviously the physical is an obvious one, and it's about the skills and the fitness. The psychological, which is the attitudes and emotions. The cognitive, which is knowledge and understanding of how, what, why, and when. And of course, the social skills. So meeting people, being active with others. From a fundamental movement skills, this is really most critical for athlete performance. It really joins in with the physical side of the physical literacy. Having great fundamental movement skills is actually the building blocks for sports specialized skills. And I'll go through an example shortly just to sort of help resonate how it sort of works and fits together. Fundamental movement skills is really about the movement patterns that involves various parts of your body. So it's about object control, locomotive skills, and balance. So having a large repertoire of an exposure to different skills is important for building those fundamental skills. So just because you're a snowboarder or a skier doesn't mean that playing football or soccer isn't as important, because it still is. It's still building those fundamental movement skills and teaching body awareness. So here's a bit of an example. It's a really basic example, but I hope it sort of helps resonate why it's so important and how something that's not just necessarily ski or snow specific can actually help you progress along with your athlete development. So using hopscotch as an example from a physical literacy side of things, the physical obviously is learning to hop, learning to balance. Psychological is building the confidence to actually play and understand how to play, which really feeds into that cognitive, which is understanding how, what, and why. So that's also understanding the rules, understanding how to stand in a line with your friends, how to I used a pebble when I was younger, and how that actually works in the format of the game. The social is teaching kids how to be active with others, how to be comfortable being active with others, and really just building friendships and the love and of being active, all this game, all the sport. So taking the skills learned as hopscotch from a young child and moving it into understanding how to learn to ski. From a physical side of things, learning how to hop and balance. When you're learning to ski, you need to learn how to balance and weight transfer. So if you haven't been exposed to doing balance things like hopscotch or I don't know, gymnastics for young kids or something like that, learning to ski could be quite a little bit difficult because your body isn't aware and hasn't got that learnt skill. Psychological is having the confidence to try skiing. Again, having confidence in yourself and understanding how to do something confidently can really, really impact your performance. Cognitive is understanding the fundamental skills required to turn and balance and weight transfer transfer and understands how your body puts this together as a learnt skill. And of course, social, everyone loves skiing with their friends and family. So having that social ability and knowing how to have fun with your family is also really important to building that love and that passion of the sport. So once you learn to ski and you become a free skier, those skills that you have learned and progressed along the way and developed helps you become a better skier. So when you have good balance and you understand weight transfer, your body understands it, you're able to make adjustments in rhythm and turning shapes, and you understand that you need to do pressure where you need to do pressure, where you need edging and rotary skills. You also have more confidence to build each of the skills, which is important, especially as you're developing through an athlete and you're trying new things. It's important to have the confidence to be able to do that. From a cognitive, understanding the number of basic movements and understanding how to put them together to make sure when you do a free ski, you're actually moving consistently. You're not just breaking up and stopping. And of course, social is always, like I said, about the fun and love of the sport. And ultimately, we want everyone to love the sport and continue on regardless of where their pathway ends up and their journey ends up. So what does it mean for an athlete if they don't have, or if they have low physical literacy and fundamental movement skills? First of all, there's a low level of athletic techniques, including the coachability. Because of those physical literacy things like cognitive and psychological, you need to be able to understand how to play, how to be fair within play. So it's easier for coaches to be able to coach that individual so they can progress. Often athletes hit a ceiling and they can't progress after a certain point. Now this varies for all athletes, that's not just necessarily for certain types, but they sort of get to a point where they just find they can't go on anymore, and hopefully they don't drop out of the sport and they continue on in any form. They are more susceptible to injury and or burnout, which I touched on before. They can't perform or perfect tasks. So a good example of this is aerial jumps. If they haven't really had that gymnastics background and they are park and pipe, it can be quite hard to sometimes perfect something because you're not really sure of your body awareness. You need to reteach yourself skills. So learning skills properly in a structured environment is really vital to your success as an athlete. It's also good to note that aerials and gymnastics, in a sense, is not just for park and pipe and moguls. It's really great for alpine, cross country, snowboarders, everybody, because it teaches you that body awareness and teaches you your center and your core. For us, it provides a low standard and sustainability and retention of athletes from emerging to elite. We would like to grow our pipeline, our number of athletes within the performance pathway, so that we have more chance of successes. We can build programs. It's always great to have a large pipeline. And the worst thing that can happen is they don't want to continue or participate in the sport anymore. Our sport relies heavily on coaches, on instructors, on volunteers, and all those people come from backgrounds where they've loved to learn skiing, they've loved skiing or snowboarding, and they want to be involved with the sport. Not everyone wants to be a performance athlete, and that's fine. That's fine. So as long as everyone enjoys, that's the most important thing. So now I'm going to do a bit of a panel with 4 of the coaches. If you guys want to jump online, Leon and Jason, oh, there we go, some of the guys. So as I mentioned before, we're lucky enough to have Sean Fleming, who is our Alpine director. There he is waving. We also have Jason Clausen, who's our snowboard cross head coach at N-Swiss. There he is, sticking his head in. We have David Parr, who's the Park and Pipe program coordinator and coach. And of course, Leon Tarbottom, who's Park and Pipe head coach at N-Swiss. So welcome guys, thanks for giving up your night tonight to have a bit of a chat tonight. So we just thought we'd break it down into 3 questions, mainly sort of based off the athlete pathway and that idea of skill development and physical literacy and why it's so important to athlete development. These guys have been involved in their sports for a very long time. They're the top of the ladder of what they do. So they have seen a lot of athletes come through. Some have succeeded, some haven't. So it'd be great to get some of your insight. So in the first instance, in your experience, can you describe why skill development is so important And can you provide some examples of what athletes can do to build their skill development on snow and off snow?
Thanks, Jason. I think I was pushed onto that one there, but the skill development, it creates the components, all the fundamental pieces that everyone will need, the athletes will need to then build the bigger skills later on. And I think one of the things here we're going to touch on is why it's so important to have those fundamental pieces, is because it's incredibly frustrating and challenging for the athlete, and it's very difficult and challenging for the coach to then introduce those fundamentals and those movements later on. Because it's imagine being able to run and do that and then being told, no, you've got to learn to walk first. It's incredibly frustrating for the athlete. So that's why that skill development and physical literacy and that play and exploration and free riding is so important at an early stage. And I think that links across to all the disciplines here. Would you agree on that, Sean?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I guess that we say is for those athletes that are really looking, to continue to progress through higher levels of competition. We always use the word mobility and being able to continue to progress. And if you don't have really strong fundamental skills, you run into more and more barriers. And it slows that progression, as David said, and Johnny was great at the beginning, it can lead to frustration. And that's also something that gets very hard after some time. And obviously the further you want to move in your sport, the more and more competitive it gets and the higher the difficulty is. And therefore, skill is really important. I thought it was awesome having Johnny speak at the beginning. Because a lot of the times I think in these things, we hear from athletes that have won the medals, that have gone and done it. And I think a lot of the times we walk away and it sounds pretty easy. It sounds pretty cruisy. And we forget that even for the most successful athletes, there's lots of roadblocks. There's lots of hiccups along the way. And you really need that resilience. And I think that the best athletes always see opportunity. And this is a perfect example. We can look at this whole season and COVID as this great barrier to our progression, but I also think there's opportunity in there. And I'm sure for the athletes that are on this, every one of us knows right now something we could get better at on snow and something we could get better at off snow. And it's being honest with ourselves, recognizing the opportunity that we have now, which for some of us, especially people stuck in Melbourne, is you do have some time right now, and maybe it means, getting better at developing your skill off snow. So when you can get back on snow, you're that much better prepared to go on. Jace?
Oh, I've just done something. Yeah, totally agree. I think Johnny touched on what we like to call a knowledge nugget, the importance of free riding on the mountain. It's the place that you probably learn the skills, not just in the park and not just on the half pipe and not just on the race course, but it's definitely the area that you can really combine all the skills in all the aspects that the hill can provide, like whether it be riding moguls, whether it be riding powder, riding the ice, riding in all the conditions. It just implements such a depth of skill and development that you can't replace by just training in one discipline alone. So it's just super important to just remember that free riding is probably the key to unlocking a large amount of skill development on the hill. And then you can branch off and take it to the disciplines that you're trying to master, you might say. As for physical literacy and so forth, I think it also ties a little bit in with that free riding. I'm fortunate enough in my sport to deal with some incredibly gifted athletes, but they're not just gifted on a snowboard, they're gifted off the snow. So if you take them onto a soccer field and they start kicking a ball or passing the ball around, you can just see that natural development that they've picked up from a young age. If you put them in the surf, they can either surf, or if you put a skateboard under their feet, they've learnt to skate. So they've developed a lot of those skills, not just on snow, but in the sports that they've done growing up and still use today in their off-mountain training. So that physical literacy never really leaves you once you become a competitor. You always revert back to the things you've learnt as a child and a young kid, and they're just sort of developed and blended into your time on the mountain.
That's great. Thanks. And what about you, Leon? Seeing you're a free ski, so you must work with a lot of athletes in the parks. What do you do outside of the parks to help build that skill with your athletes?
Yeah, some great points put across from all the presenters so far. Learning to want to get better in all aspects, I think, is what helps create an elite athlete. So wanting to learn the fundamentals and wanting to be better at the fundamentals at an early age, I think gradually just becomes part of your daily routine. You go and even at World Cups and stuff, we go and do warm-up runs where we're doing basic fundamental drills to try and get the body and the muscle memories all warmed up, and like it's consistent throughout your career as a professional skier or snowboarder, to be continually trying to better those fundamental skills. And yeah, Jason touched, I think, on a really good point about doing a whole bunch of other sports. The more active you are with your body, the more you get to know what your body is capable of, and you get to learn where everything goes and how it works. So it only helps to become an elite athlete if you dabble in certain other things and not just focus on one thing too early.
Yeah, wonderful, great. So moving on to the second question. Given the current COVID-19 environment, we know clubs are very limited with some of their program offerings, and some clubs aren't even running at this point through the season. Can you provide any advice to athletes wanting to progress during the time and provide maybe some ideas or examples of what they could be doing?
Do you want me to start this one so I'm not just
Yeah,
wrapping up
sure.
everyone else?
Yep.
Well, it leads perfectly on from the first question. There is so much that you can be doing that is going to help you have some physical literacy and know where your body is and what it can do. So we talked briefly today about getting a slack line or learning how to juggle. Today I had my first go on a unicycle. It's really hard, but it was a learning process that my brain started talking to my body and was trying to solve the steps as we go. So the more things that I do like that, yeah, your brain talks to your body a little bit quicker and you learn more. And so yeah, juggling, balance, hand-eye coordination, new sports are constantly helping much more than just that one specific skill.
No. Great. What about anyone in the Jindy office down there?
Probably just on the mental side, it's one side that can drive a coach crazy sometimes. It's the use of iPhones, and I know a lot of kids love their phones, but for a change, they can probably use their phones for a benefit mentally right now. There's a lot of podcasts out there that the younger athletes and even parents can be listening to help guide some direction and get some good ideas and concepts that they can move on through their career, and also some good Instagram followers that they might be able to tag along with. Some leading athletes in the sport are posting some incredible home sessions and maybe development opportunities. So for once, the iPhone is actually a little bit more beneficial than just paying the bill. Physically, I know there's been a lot of focus early on about, we got to get into the gym, but as Leon mentioned, there's other sports out there that hopefully all the kids are involved with, whether it be surfing, skating, rollerblading, unicycling, just something that can help with transitions or flow to get going, and definitely trampolining as well for those aerialists. So if they don't have that time on snow with the clubs and they're not getting that guidance, it's really up to the athletes to take that initiative. It's something that we've spoken about as coaches, that we don't want to be breeding athletes that are 100% reliant on the club and the coach's hunt program. We want the parents and the athletes to be able to come up with their programs outside of the club, what other activities they're doing, what other things they're working on. I know growing up for me personally, everything I did was a challenge or a competition, and that was with myself. And that could be whether it was playing handball or playing against a brick wall, whether it was going for a run and judging how far I could run and whether I could push that further the next time, even doing a handstand, how long I could hold a handstand for. But making things competitive with myself and starting to push myself and have my own challenges really started to set my own standards. So I wasn't fortunate enough to grow up with a club, whether it was cricket or soccer or anything. I was a bit of a out there in the country kid. So I really had an older brother that beat me up and try to push against. So yeah, I spent a lot of time challenging myself. So if there's one thing I could get the athletes out there or the up and comers to do is make a bit of a competition and a challenge for yourself. Everything you do, like push a bit, work and keep track. Just judge your own level and your own score, you might say, and see where it takes you.
Yep, great. Some great ideas there, Jason.
Yeah, and I think both Jason and Leon keep coming back to that same point, and Johnny started with it of, you know, challenge yourself, set challenge, embrace that idea of challenge, and part of that is setting goals, you know, and set some little short-term goals. Leon just said, you know, about juggling, and we're using it with some athletes here or whatever. A lot of people go, yeah, how's that going to make me ski better or snowboard better? But, you know, it does, it links the mind and the body. But more importantly, I think it's a challenge that you can stick with and see an outcome. Can you juggle at the end of a month or at the end of a couple weeks, whatever? These are simple little things, but starting to set some short-term goals and also some long-term goals make it a lot easier to get through a really weird season like this, or for lots of athletes that have had to go through injury, it's no different. Having that long-term goal all of a sudden means, okay, maybe I can't ski or snowboard for the next month or 2 months, depending on where I am, but it's not the end of the world because I have these little goals, these little steps, and I can still feel like I'm progressing, you know. And for those that can access the mountain in whatever form, even if it's not with a club, you know, the mountain is the best teacher. Jason's 100% right there. Use the mountain, challenge yourself. You know, you all know when you're in balance or you're out of balance, and the mountain is probably the best teacher of that, better than any coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I'd say, just to summarize on that and wrap it up into one statement, we got pulled off snow early in March with the COVID, so it's ongoing since, you know, March, and the last 3 months in N3S OWI, everything we've been working on. A statement that I must have made 1,000 times if I've made it once is, it's not the 100 days on snow this year that will determine your success. It's your 260 days off snow and what you do with that time that will determine your success. So yeah, we are in a COVID world, and like you say, there's some limitations with the mountains and everything. But I think everything wrapped up into there is what you do with your time and how much you want it stuff dictates your effort you put in.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely. It's really interesting sitting here and listening to you guys. You all work in three different disciplines, really. And it's really interesting to me that all of you guys are saying exactly the same thing. So it's not necessarily a discipline specific solution. It's really something that can be put across all the disciplines. So I find that really interesting, that especially when I speak to all the coaches, that it's always the same things coming up and the same examples. So to finish off, our last question, as high performance coaches, what is your biggest tip for athletes in general? And this doesn't have to be COVID specific. It can be anything that you would give to the general community of what you think would be a really good tip to get them through.
I can fire off on this one.
Go for it, dude.
Happy to. Biggest tip for everyone developing is that competition success at a junior level is one of the weakest or poorest predictors of competition success at a senior level. It's across all disciplines. I mean, when you look at any of the codes and the rugby codes, just saw something recently, and this is evidence-based. It's not just a random generic statement. It's, you know, I think 20%, I think it was something like 20% of all the senior professional code players were successful as a junior player. So play, explore, and, you know, when we are doing those futures and looking at stuff, it's not just competition results we look at, it's everything that makes a holistic person. other than that, yeah, that's my biggest tip.
Right.
Going back, I guess, on everything I've said, I think you know, create your own opportunity wherever you can. Embrace the challenge within that, you know, and set goals, and you will always be moving forward. There'll be bumps on the road, but I think that's it. It's a long journey, no matter what discipline any of the athletes are competing in, to make it all the way into that elite or mastery of F10. It's a very long journey, and for most of the people on this, they're very early on. So the more you can embrace that, the easier the time will be.
Yep, great. Jason or Leon?
We'll continue with The Office. Probably from my side, I think if we look at the big picture, we have coaches, we have clubs, we have Snow Australia, we have parents, we have supporters. They're all part of a puzzle. So it's really the athlete's job to put the puzzle together and find the right puzzles at the right time and make those connections work. But the key is they are the puzzle master. So they've really got to be the ones that do the work and figure it out and make it best balance their pathway. So they've got to enjoy it as well. Like, it's not just a mission and they've got to be told everything. They've got to enjoy putting that puzzle together. So there's going to be challenges. You might lose a piece under the couch for a couple of days, but you have to go out and find it, and it will come together. So enjoy the challenges that are there, and don't get down when the times are down. There's always a little bit of silver lining, and COVID has given us that a little bit as well. A bit of time to work on some of the other aspects that we might not have a chance to do. There should be no excuses at the end of COVID for no one having their homework done. That is for sure. So yeah, enjoy the challenges that are ahead.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. And what about outside the office, Leon?
It says what your biggest tip, singular, but I've kind of got two. I think one of them, firstly, I think would be organisation. To be organised, you can fit so much more in when you allocate time to do certain things. Even to be creative, you need to actually allocate time to do that. Often creative ideas come at spontaneous moments when you're in the shower or when you're out mowing the lawn or whatever you're doing. But I think if you allocate time to do certain tasks, then you're going to be more efficient in getting those done and progressing further. And I think the second one would probably be communication. Talk to people. Don't be afraid to ask for help or ask for tips, and talk to other athletes, talk to kids that are not always better than you, but some that you can give a tip to, because the way that you think about things and break things down to help coach someone else helps your understanding of certain tasks as well. So I think communication is a really good tool to use.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting on your first point, Leon. I was going to say, from my learnings and working with also so many different coaches through this process of the F10, the biggest gripe they ever had was athletes, first of all, turning up with their parents packing their stuff, so they never had all their equipment or their lunches packed or anything like that, and that they just weren't organised. So I think that's a really reflective tip that I've heard a lot through my time working with all you guys with the Athlete Pathway. So thank you guys for all of your help and coming along this evening. I will now pass back to Johnny, who will finish up our first futures. So thanks, Johnny.
Great. Thank you, Beck, and thank you to all the coaches that donated your time and all your intellect tonight. If anyone out there, any of the participants has any questions that they want to maybe ask some of the coaches, could you type your name into the chat and I can unmute you with my powers? No questions? Was that a question from you, Liv Monkman-Straub? Anyway, I think we're running a bit low on time anyway. So if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with me via email. My contact details are on the website, and I'll chase down some answers for you. Thank you so much for participating in the first webinar. I think they're going to get better as we go on. And next week, I'll give a quick plug to a webinar on Tuesday at the same time, 6 p.m. It's going to be on mental preparation and planning. So a lot of that stuff that some of the coaches were talking about in terms of goal setting and resilience and what you can be doing to make the most of this time where we're sort of forced to be off snow a bit more than usual. And then we're also going to have a topic on social media, how that can affect performance and strategies for you guys around using that as young developing athletes. So that's about all from me. I might say good night to everyone and
Everyone.
time, and hopefully we'll see you back here same time next week.
Yep. Wonderful. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks all. Night,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Leon.
Benjamin.
I can't unvideo myself. It's kind of weird.